Good evening, everyone. Thank you, NA. I just met. Thank you for your very supportive yet very insightful reading. Hopefully, I live up to this your introduction. Thank you also, Manije, for going through all the trouble, especially the last minute. And thank you, Eva, who's not here. You owe me dinner, by the way. Title of this lecture series, I understand that is a new canonical histories, and we have not actually been necessarily going after a new canon per se, but we've been kind of pursuing a unique mode of practice and thinking that are only possible in Korea, where we are based, and we accept. Not much small talk, but this interrogation mode, and I'll try to somehow address this. And my talk will be in 3 parts. And the first one, I get that we want to move forward and go beyond canons, but to do that, actually, I think we want to go before, to look at what was before the canons, or beneath or below the canons. And there were a couple of occasions in our previous projects that we forced ourselves to look back. We designed South Korean pavilion for the Shanghai Expo in 2010, and this expo had 200 nations, the highest ever number of participants in history of expo. What is notable is that in 100 years of period of time, the world has close to quadrupled in population and in similar proportion in the number of nations. So we just jumped into this kind of absurd theme park of national identities where the majority, maybe 3/4 of the world nations, had less than 100 years of identity as a sort of the state sort of entity, and they are mostly had a quite different sort of modernization process, which has to do with this canon. Transmission, let's say, the process. So here we are kind of surrounded by bowls and domes, and what I call Niemeyer-esque sort of a scape. And this view is from another sort of another dome or spaceship. And these were all the largest pavilions after Chinese pavilion. From the left is Japan, Korea, and then Saudi Arabia and India, and they're not even young nations. Actually, they were 100 years ago. They kind of showed up from the early on. And these are the Korean pavilions in World Expos in 20th century. The very first one in Chicago, it looks nothing like Korean to me. Right? I mean, it looks more like Indonesian, maybe some kind of a lost in translation situation. And then second one, 100 in Paris Expo, you have more proper, sort of authentic, dignified Korean building. And then there's about 50 more than half century gap, which is the New York Expo, and then the Montreal Expo also in the 60s. And that explains what has in between was this colonial period of 35 years, and then followed by Korean War and so on. So a lot has happened, and this kind of canon process was kind of, I think, deviated. But these two are quite important architects, actually only probably important 2 architects. One is the New York, is Kim Jung-up, who worked for Corbusier during the Chandigarh time in the 50s. The other one, Kim Soo-gun, studied around the same time in Tokyo when the Tokyo University, when the Metabolis was very thriving. So and then, but then they both died quite young in their 50s and 60s, around 1980s, and so that kind of left us another kind of void of influences in a way. So there's constant sort of brain drain, and then come back, and sort of also crisis in talent in a way. But then now it's a very different time. So yeah, I mean, first 2 pavilions are kind of clear that it's before the canons, and then the other 2 are after, somehow arrived there. And after that is also followed by few other other expos until now, sort of a Korean pavilion appeared with what I call post-colonial fan dance, double gaze mode of varying degrees of pure aggression to passive aggressive, which I'm not going to get to. So this is an alibi for a symbol that we chose for the Shanghai Expo instead of dragons and lanterns and pottery. And we choose multiple things that is 24 letters from Korean alphabet, which itself is a modern idea, which was invented 500 years ago as a kind of a democratic distribution of knowledge. But in a Venturian sense, this is a decorated shed pretending to be a duck because the budget was outrageously low. So we call it duck shed or decorated duck as we call it. And it was kind of, we basically deliberately choose to have this very abstract geometry, straight lines, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and circle to kind of, but it more or less work with circulation systems and so on. And but more importantly, instead of presenting it as a large object, we present it as a room, a space that is captured by this kind of merger of these geometries, simple geometries. The space that is larger than the soccer field, 7 meter tall, semi-enclosed space, sort of with a porosity. So sort of has this metaphor of our situation as an open peninsula situation. And you can see this kind of, our plan talks with the round one is a Japanese one, but it talks more with the smaller scales of these other supporting buildings in plan, like toilets and information booth and so on. So also with the Kentucky Fried Chicken pavilion next to it with a rather humble appearance. Of course, this is part that we have to put circle for Korea, so it's a little bit formally contrived, but overlooking the Hwangpu River with a Korean restaurant with a viewing deck above. And this is kind of the moment like, wow, you know, the big void. And this worked well because we ended up being the second most visited pavilion after Chinese pavilion. And average waiting hour was 3 hours. And just to go upstairs and see the very disappointing K-pop video for 30 minutes and come down. And sort of, and this capture space is a sign as space idea. The other one was a sort of a space as a sign, and then sign as space, sort of. And this was a 1 to 300 scale, 3-dimensional model of Seoul with the river and mountain as a stage and bleachers for waiting people. And then this was among the 200 countries, there was a first timer, it said, North Korea, appear very first time, they say, next to Iran and Iraq pavilion, which someone jokingly said this was the axis of evil street. But that, you know, that also Chinese kind of, I think, a little middle finger maybe to Americans and how inclusive they are and so on. And I mean, there are literally decorated shed types because it was, they built this thing and then they rent it out basically, so decorated there with their own identities. But then it made me think that their history will be also, told this way actually. It's not their first pavilion, but actually they appeared 100 years ago because the country was one country. So in a way, they kind of, more than a century later, they kind of showed up again. And then I walked in, I felt like I was in the Cold War movie almost, because as most people here can go to North Korea, but South Korea can't. And it was, then I was shocked that what they had inside was just like our concept, that they actually brought Pyongyang in interior space. Of course, it's quite different style, but sort of like a socialist, realist style. But nevertheless, it was quite inviting space. So that kind of struck me in an almost emotional way, actually. And then 3 years later, after Expo, I have to look back again for the 2014 Venice Biennale, that the mandate for all the national pavilion given by then director Rem Koolhaas was absorbing modernity from 1914 to 2014. So from my previous experience with the Expo, I mean, this wouldn't make sense when you look back just to bring South Korean story, will be missing the half of the story. So then I had to think about actually showing both territories. So then it was a time that Kim Jong-un, the leader, North Korean, the mysterious young leader, just become after his father's sudden death, and it was the new Korean president who is at the time who is in jail now after impeachment. Wasn't really going very well. So, but I just did it anyway because I thought it was very important. I didn't know anything about North Korea, but Plan A was actually trying to do the first architecture exhibition of both countries together, both by North and South Korea. So, which become maybe more than curatorial effort, but more like a diplomatic effort. That there are a lot of European diplomats, ambassadors, Goethe institutes. Also, actually, British Council was very helpful, and then also journalists who has access. So basically, they become this kind mediator between the two. And first 8 months was this is very dry sort of a log of Plan A, but it's actually quite dramatic situations. And a lot of people thought, I think I myself thought it was quite megalomaniacal actually in trying that. But when you have even less than 1%, if it's worth it, you have to go for that. And then of course didn't fell through, but I also was simultaneously actually as a result of this also was Plan B was growing because we were introduced by so many different artists and architects and urbanists, photographers and filmmakers and so on. So we end up sort of bringing 39 people's work from 14 different countries. So it's not by South and North Korea, but it's actually about North and South Korea, mediated by various people. So the title was called Crow's Eye View, and he was trained as an architect, and he lived only during the Japanese colonization era only for 27 years, and he's a Crow's Eye View is a poetry that he wrote for supposed to be the 1 month long serial poem. Was on a just general newspaper, but then it stopped because people complained so much that it was completely unintelligible. So of course, obviously this was 1934, but he was influenced heavily by this Dadaists poetry. I think it's called concrete poetry also. It's kind of a typography, very visual. And in a way, this one, poem number 4, was quite shocking because it's kind of he shows something that is flipped and split in half. He didn't even experience the division, only he died before the division, 10 years or more than that. So this become our logo almost, our identity for exhibition. And then one thing I can mention is this was how it was published on a newspaper, and you can tell that this title, Crow's Eye View, is a Chinese hieroglyph, and difference between bird and crow is just a one stroke. It looks like it's a missing eye when you look at the crow. Is also bird eye view is, I think, quite important gaze of modernity with airplanes and Le Corbusier's fascination, all that bird eye view. But I think the Crow's Eye View is about the very particular view, not universalizing it necessarily, but also kind of view that exists but overlooked or is not recognized in a way. So then we kind of brought this sort of a serious amount of work, quite fragmented sort of materials, but we decide with other 2 curators that it's almost like a patchwork of small cartographers, kind of areas and regions, but then try to create a globe. So it's kind of a hodgepodge sort of a big map, but instead, fragmentation, we show the 4 sort of themes that are common. So that one is about the everyday post-war reconstruction, and then the monuments, and then there's this important Brit involved, Nick Bonner, you probably heard of, Korea Tours, who's been running the tour company to North Korea for the last almost 30 years now, and he collected enormous amount of work. And then last one is borders. So I just quickly go through some of these images are basically, I wouldn't tell you which one is North Korea or South Korea, but some of the pages of the book, they have actually shockingly despite of ideological differences, they have this amazing, almost choreographed sort of influences or interests also during different time. So these were maybe not kind of in a way talked about much, but and of course there are also differences. For example, this is the person who did Kim Soo-gun Montreal Pavilion, who also did Olympic Stadium for '88, and here himself sort of like a posturing as a monument almost himself. The other one, this was a 1989 May Day Stadium they built, which is twice as bigger than South Korean ones. And construction worker and colleagues are kind of featured heavily here as a sort of a heroics. And there's also more contemporary work by Moon Hoon and this kind of anonymous, can't be revealed, young North Korean architects, green city fantasies and so on. And we also discovered some completely unknown things like North Korean contribution to African continents in the from the 70s all the way until now, and so on. And so the exhibition space looked like that, and it kind of spilled over outside. But then for us, it was actually a very important thing from this exhibition, in a way I didn't expect, was I was able to bring most of the living participants in Venice, and a lot of them know about their own work, but first time they got to meet each other. So in a way, it became a very interesting, almost launching of a sort of a kind of, now it's still going on in a way. I mean, there were kind of people who were spread out, but I think there's also other. One of the spin-off could be related to Calvin Chua here, who I'm very jealous because he was teaching here. He brought students to Pyongyang and so on. So these are the sort of a space and timeline of these 39 protagonists, and it's almost bittersweet in a way that initially my plan A was try to stay within these two little countries, only like 20 miles apart. But then you have to kind of go through these kind of detours and so on. So, and I think closest thing we had was 2 months after the exhibition opened. We were ambushed by the kind North Korean ambassador with his secretary and his daughter. So there was a very kind exchange. I think he was genuinely curious. And the shows traveled to Korea and also New York. Here's Eva invited us to storefront, and there's some other spin-off things happening different part of the world. And meanwhile, the Korea become quite, I think, quite exciting time with the new political change last 3 years. So it's actually this North and South Korea. I don't have to feel like the Cold War spy situation, but it's actually become quite mainstream. Even Nick Bonner brought this, what was in London, I think, shown the graphic designs of North Korea products and so on. And they came very colorful, very engaging. And the next project somehow kind of, I got invited just after Venice. There's a Korean artist who's based in Tokyo many years to be a part of what has become the large collective effort in dealing with the DMZ for the last 5 years. And DMZ, you probably heard of, is a 4-kilometer wide buffer zone between North and South Korea. And it's about 200 kilometers long, and it's mostly untouched by humans for the last 66 years after the war. And Che and her team, including us, presented first 5 years of work recently at the Hara Museum earlier this spring. As you know, DMZ came out of the tragedy and mostly understood as a result of geopolitical power dynamism in the last century. It is most heavily armed territories in the world, with an estimated 2 million, that's arguable, never know exact number, but the landmines, which will be taking 100 years to decay because it's mostly made out of plastic. And however, it's been also unintentionally reserved for more than 2,000 plants and animals and more than 100 endangered species. So Che collaborated with the Shigeru Ban, designed the elevated passage above the landscape of the DMZ to encourage interaction, but in a kind of peaceful way, least intrusive way. And then along the path, she initially designed a location for jeongjas, which is a word for pavilions, lookout points, reserved view for North South Korean participants eventually, and then she started inviting people. This was 2016 Venice Biennale, where this was first shown. Che and Shigeru Ban's work. Shigeru Ban's work is basically, he's been testing until now using live bamboos as a structural support. So it kind of floats, and then wooden planks. So these are that. These are the recent Hara Museum exhibition. He made a 1 to 5 model of real with live bamboo. And there's some of like Mumbai Studio, Bijoy Jain, artist Libo, and Olaf Eliasson and Sebastian Berman, Condensation Pavilion. Korean architect Seung Yo-sang with this decaying tower that is made out of wood called Bird Monastery, and so on. There are a few others. And she also sort of started imagining the maybe almost like a constitution for natures, how people had take part of this, and it's like taking the time of what time that people can pass through, how many people, what to eat, toilets, what to wear, so that it doesn't distract for animals and so on. So it's a really thorough sort of a development. And we were invited actually quite early on before this pavilion architects and artists, and she asked us something else actually, that this red dot, both end of this pilgrimage, she asked me to think about seed bank and ecology library. So idea was I wasn't yes, and then I think it's about these things are popping up all over the world, that it's almost comparable to what happened in England a few centuries ago, First Enclosure Act, about land ownership and so on. But now that's what's happening with seeds. There's GMOs and so on, and then also about the knowledge, the patents and intellectual copyrights and things like that, getting extremely commodified. So actually, I went to Wakehurst, which is an hour from here, the Millennium Seed Bank, to understand. And I think some of you know this Svalbard and these facilities to really preserve. It's actually, I think, it's a quite modern symbolic function, and also the data sort of a library. It's not a data, digital data library. That is another story now that's happening, but this is actually the other way around. That this important data can turn into almost like a Rosetta Stone in a modern way. That actually, because these data migration itself has a problem of evaporating and so on, and so many different new technology comes out, but it's really about the selecting important data and preserve in a kind of analog way, and that's also happening. So basically her idea is to bringing these what has happened in this territory with seeds, and also knowledge about this ecology could be preserved in an important sort of a way. So then I realized there is instead of making a new building, there's a tunnel that is discovered by South Koreans. I mean, obviously it was made by North Korean for invasion purpose. We discovered 4 of them that is not far from where she proposed this passage. So then now it's a kind of a dark tourism site. So the person in the center is Choi Jae-eun and then Seung Yo-sang. Few years ago we went there together, and it was made manually by North Koreans in the 70s, and there's a section. Obviously you have to, with actually manual labor of really minimum 2 meter diameter space almost, and you have to only go up, otherwise you'll be digging down into the water, and that would be not possible. So then somehow they got discovered because they didn't realize they were hitting the ground surface. So, but then also what the fascinating thing that we discovered was the borderline and the tunnel intersect is almost close, very close to the ground surface. So that was quite an interesting discovery, and this was our exhibition at the Hara Museum. And this, the intersection point being very close to the surface is not a, let's say, coincidence, because back then there were about occupying higher plateaus, and a lot of Death Valley happened. When they signed the peace treaty, a lot of these borderline fell on the valley, so that was the one reason. So we're just thinking that we kind of start from this center point where the most tragic line happen, intersects, and then these two sets of symbiotic sort of archive of nature and culture can grow southward and northward. And then, of course, you have to have this kind of above ground facilities. So that was a diagram, and it's a ways to sort of store these important things, two things. And then so idea become that maybe that intersection point is where we make this kind of a landscape acupuncture. And this geological area, this area is actually one of the most important also bird migration site in Korea, because they have hot springs, although so it goes down to minus 40 degree, but its water is like 10 degree. So that's another sort of what we fantasize about. And maybe the way we cut it is we're bringing this kind of quarry machine to this intersection, and then one by one, actually, we moved from north to south to create sort of a plinth, and actually that would be the ground for two facilities above ground. One would be something that kind of resembles in a way Wakehurst Millennium Seed Bank, and she's been working with also DMZ Ecology Research Institute. That they've been working on it much longer. And then the South Korea would be the ecology library that would have almost a public library function, together with how to transfer this knowledge into the most preservable format, in analog format. And we are working with the neuroscientist, Chung Jae-seung, actually volunteer, so he's making the manual. So these last 66 years, you probably have seen there's so much dramas, and Panmunjom has been an interaction point. We are able to actually go to North Korean, the most beautiful mountain, until 11 years ago. And that was during the Sunshine Policy time. And also the Kaesong, there was an industrial complex. I know a guy who was going from Seoul to going to work every day, working with North Korean workers. Like, there are few rules, like you cannot bring your USB, and there are certain things you have to fully check, but they were crossing borders every day. Of course, there are infrastructure that can be connected. There's also there's this archaeology site that could be a common project. So our project could be a one way that we imagine to happen, but still very volatile. But I think it's good to have an architecture project that has, regardless of these other things, that we can sort of have independently interested. And recently, a couple of months ago, actually, the South Korean president made a UN speech about the DMZ. He was suggesting as a world peace zone, which I think we were so happy to hear that, because he was, it shouldn't be the two-country project, but it should be the concern for the world, because I think this ecology is, I think, quite important and unique opportunity in a way. So that will be my first part. So, and the second one, actually, again, I'm showing again these trajectories of these 39 actors for the Venice show, but this could possibly be the metaphor for how architecture canon have arrived in Korea during the time, with complex detours and mediations and deviations and loss and translations and so on. Then at the beginning of 21st century, when I started math studies, after canon arrived, radically different mode of exchanging knowledge started to happen, as we all know, so-called flattening effect, so to speak. So I think also we don't really hear much about canons, actually. And I came back to Seoul around this time, and one would think that these kind of complex influences will have a very rich architecture culture, but I encountered this when I came back. So, and it's almost forgivable considering the 50 times of population growth of Seoul, from 200,000 to, at the time, 11 million, which is now shrunk a little bit, 10 million. So, and then at that moment, I sensed that there were especially my region, but I think it happened everywhere else, that at that time it was two ever polarizing camps in architecture. One is a systematic camp who is fearlessly responsible for 99% of the built environment. And they were very brave, yet somehow feel very guilty because they don't have time to think. And then the other is the heterogeneous camp, whose share is remaining 1%, small, yet those consider this profession as a serious cultural endeavor. And they're making dialogues of canons, or at least not completely oblivious about the canons as their counterpart. And they're very sensitive, yet very angry, because they don't have much to do, and actually involved. And as guilt and anger are not very healthy places to be an architect, to function in this world, and also we're wanting to take on the brave and sensitive bits from these two. So I have to find some kind of an alternative mode, which I call the systematic heterogeneity. By the way, this is the very first project that actually made me go back to Korea at the end. It's an 80 square meter house for a family of 4, where the brief was to design a house that never existed before, because they don't want their children to grow up in the sameness of this kind of apartment. Now they all grew up and become actually young adult, and they're quite unique people, so I'm very happy for that. Typically, a painting is made by first outlining a big picture, outlining the big picture, and rough sketch, then to details. Then the alternative mode I was thinking seemed like a reverse process. Starting from tiny bits, dots in here and there, then somehow the larger things start to merge over time. Actually, there are painters who works this way. You're looking at Yayoi Kusama. But then I realized this may be not a proper analogy, because we're not artists. Unlike artists, we have to work with others, like such as the rest of the world, outside our office, let's say, which constantly changing and often in adversarial to what we're trying to do. So actually, maybe I thought more fitting analogy would be, I thought of the game of Go. There's many East Asians, so might be familiar with this, which had to be played by 2. And painters' dot can be erased or painted over, but Go's alternating black and white dots are irreversible, affecting each other through recursive process in time. You look at this, we used to have this everyday newspaper of this famous play result, and you can read the whole story there. Numbers on dots represent the order here. And I love the idea, actually. I thought it was quite radical that dot does not by itself have a value, but it only becomes important within certain constellations at certain moments. So, and whoever foresees a few stones ahead with a better strategy will have a bigger constellation. And what's also I think is important is that I said it's adversarial, often adversarial, but this Go game now is all become this media kind of competition sports event also, but it was originally meant to be considered to be the highest form of exchange between the two minds in a way. So you are looking at what followed after as a kind of chronological sequence. And we've been kind of responding to a series of distinctive geographical, social, political conditions in constant flux. Consequently, each project developed from ideas extracted from its highly own specific conditions, each with multiple variables of scale, speed, and economy. Small to large, slow to fast, cheap to expensive, seemingly absent of apparent order. In response to the fluctuating complexity of urban development and grounded in obsessive curiosity of the reality in which it operates, we have pursued sort of something that simultaneously embrace the general, the obscure, and the unseen as opportunities. The built and unbuilt projects of mass studies are an ongoing cartographic record of ideas over time. Individual projects are less isolated events and more an interconnected assemblage of multiple ideas. And let's see. Yeah, to stay abreast of such fluid conditions, architect must constantly strategize and be responsive to changing context. Like the game of Go, each move is both offense and defense, creating a constellation of reactions in an evolutionary process. This requires one to be aware of and utilize everything that came before while projecting what might happen after. Our projects are not concerned with the a priori narrative of an architectural beginning and the physical end of the work, because usually architecture narrative, I think, is constructed like almost biblical. There's this immaculate conception beginning, and then we all go to heaven at the end, like the tired napkin sketch on the airplane of this brilliant architects, and then Iwan Ban, good friend, comes in and take this beautiful moment, and that's the firework at the end somehow. But for us, it's more about this cyclical idea, and architecture is actually rather the conception to realization of the building as the in-between performance of the larger recursive process. This is probably one of the, we just moved into our own building, awkwardly positioned in this particular urban setting that we designed last year. And the before and after, which I choose as a title, is actually 5 years ago, there was an exhibition of our own first 12 years of work. And of course, this I have to fight with my curator, which is she's a brilliant person, but it's like, you got to highlight some important projects. And then we first 12 years, we've been kind of constantly keeping our size around 30 people. I mean, beginning was 4, then it quickly grew, but we kind of didn't grow further. Now 36, but also, we had about 12 projects every year. So first 12 years we did about 150 projects. Only quarter of them got built. A lot of lost competitions and also silly speculative projects and so on, unrealized, a lot more, 3 times more. So we end up choosing 69 projects that half of them are unbuilt and half of them, are built, and somehow first threw it there. The number, like a Go game chart, is actually the year, and then each year the A is the first one, and the red one number system is the unbuilt one. And the given space was actually interesting. The whole thing becomes its own project. So basically there's a lobby with the 2 amazing Rodin sculpture, that's a lobby, and then there are 2 rooms. So basically we show one room, what we call white room, which is a before room. We show everything that happens before building is complete. That's the moment that divides before and then after. And then after is basically how the building lives or mutated or even dead, or this different tumultuous life of our building in a way. One could be said, this is how you enter, and there's a ticket checking counter we design, and then you can either go to the before room, which is kind of like a cleaner version of our own office, and then after is sort of a madhouse actually. And you can see this kind of a strange, curious thing on the floor. And you have a choice, but also you can kind of experience in a cyclical way, so you can make a loop. Instead of showing this curator's instance of highlighting by project, we actually show before room is actually by how our profession is sort of in sequence, also in process. So from all the site visit pictures to, I think it goes to like details. I mean, at the beginning there's a client brief, and there's something about also, to see it, but like interior packages and and diagrams, but we kind of show it as a whole by this process, divided by process. Looks something like that. And we show only, there are selected projects, but certain aspect highlights one specific projects and so on, and I don't have time to tell you everything, but again, there's some suspicious things on the floor. Is something that we later to develop this exhibition, we kind of highlighted this, our preoccupation of 21 of them, maybe like an emoji. I don't think the word emoji existed there, with that just pictogram, but, and then kind of we order them as a, sort of in the frequency. So the most frequent one, I'm not gonna tell you everything. Some about what do you call it? 기하기 뭐죠? Geometry. I'm sorry. blanking out. I mean, I say some of them are, you don't even have to explain, but we've been using a lot of circles in like appears in a way. Thank God we didn't use circle for the Shanghai Expo pavilion. And then I think this is actually third one up here most is a matrix studies. I think it was a lot of things unknown. It was actually pretty intense at the beginning, although we were very young. Obviously, we were in a way lucky to deal with this kind of situation very first time. And for me, I don't even mind this Spartan beauty here, but I think it was a problem was a social condition that it wasn't dealt with. So basically, these are typical how the section looks like, these type of settings, and then we develop these things, and you're looking at actually realized ones, and there are a lot more unrealized ones as well. But also these diagrams came later. I think that's important that we don't just sit around and come up with this, but we do that also as to develop a speculative projects, but also we actually what we call missing matrix here is actually happen because of certain site conditions. And this is also same time it's not only site specific but also time specific, because building regulation changes and zoning changes and so on. So, but then somehow I think some of these sentiments are that we don't really want to have this specific moment. I mean, that's how things get built and realized, but this could be almost like a manual, and we develop quite intensely for a while. And for example, this is I mean, a lot of it is about decompression strategy and to create more social space, but also with better lights and better environment quality. And this bundle can appear again at the post-2008 crisis, much smaller version with the same strategy of this kind of a 3 volumes sort of leaning against each other, create this residual space, which could be later used quite well. However, I kind of, at a certain point, I got kind of bored with it, because I think it become only so much with this capitalist development you can do. And also, I realized these things, I think more project that I experienced was actually, more concrete idea about the users. That's more also more satisfying. I think so. I mean, most of the building built without knowing who's going to use it. I think that's so very important. So, but then we've done a couple of other dormitories and other more user-specific sort of housings, and this was actually at the time was shown as a big model. But then a couple of years ago, it was completed. It's a dormitory for 600 students, and from the campus level, it appears as a 4-story building, but this building has a 27-meter drop. Korea is 70% mountains, so that actually is a 10-story building. So it's a simple courtyard, and then you start from the sort of double-loaded corridor with the gap in between. And these are cheap construction, so it's actually a planar wall, reinforced concrete wall system. And then you have to adapt to the site, the slope, and also the geometry has to be more like a parallelogram because of the grain of the slope. And then what we did was actually the typically 10-story dormitories, like you have first 2 floors, 1 floor as a common area, and then there's 8 floors of sleeping area. But because of the slope, actually there has, in the middle there are two common floors that is sandwiched by boys' rooms and then girls' rooms, basically, and they meet in the middle. And this central floor is actually a suspended floor with the giant trusses. And also the hidden, the cafeteria, as many as 350 students can eat at the same time. So every floor changes, and this has been a quite exciting development for us. And typical floor is actually like a straight corridor, double-loaded corridor with this 2.4-meter gap in between that could be appropriated. And then the other side, the diagonal becomes a sort of a pixelated, zigzagging, old Korean alleyway sort of a situation. So in a way, I think we try to do this Hertzbergian idea that no corridors, not just for passing, but something can happen. And I think and then also we did something Korean that you get out of the elevator and then you take up your shoes. And you know what Koreans are like. They take up their shoes and they just sit anywhere and they become their living room. So basically, these are the straight corridors with pockets with different heights. And these are the zigzagging corridors. We also intentionally put all the wash area outside. Showers are all private and toilets, but wash areas where all the romantic village Korea. I have that experience, but like the well is a kind of where everyone gathers, where the water is. So. Okay, and then I go the next one, time specific. You can, this we're designing time also, not only space. Am I going to? Yeah, I think I should hurry up. So this is a 1 hour architecture. It was Emil Greco and Peter Scholten. I think they're quite amazing choreographers. This is 1 week, 1 week time specific project with hula hoop domes, all unzipped, tied, and recycled as hula hoops. Like 1,000 of them. Shanghai Expo was a 6 months time-specific building, but this idea is a whole spectrum of it. So basically, we have to be very smart about it. These are more like a value, more has to do with the Korean Jimjilbang spa situation. It's a very unique Korean phenomena. Circulations, I think these are all self-explanatory, so I'll just go through it. This is probably the one thing that is architectural, sort of almost most autonomous sort of idea that we kind of come up with this the space for office for IT company, and we kind of imagine this kind of a 5 structure that could be stacked up and varied because the site was actually enormous. This become nice toy puzzle for children for our exhibition. And it gets quite varied space with this simple form, and it's also quite modest budget, I have to say. But also what's interesting is that just a year before we did a shop, that was a kind of a heterogeneous project that it was very meant to be a unique project. But when you look at the plan, there's like circular column and half circle, quarter circle. Somehow that become a larger systematic circle becomes like a cylinder, and then it become quite interesting evolution in a way. And then we did also other things that are not systematic, but it's like very unique about this. We call it also kind of culminated here for now. We call it domino, which is also systematic 5 stories stacked up using also the air circulation, which don't need in the center. Somehow we create this unique office space and so on. Box. We were kind of, now I think it's quite common, but this was very first project. Plan and section actually matched that. Yeah, Jindogu, probably Japanese know about this useless Japanese invention. This actually like Venice or also our DMZ project kind of in this category actually. Anyway, so these are how we have kind of laid out our dots, but this one is kind of a last one. Only happened 3 times. That basically don't try this at your practice because you're going to be bankrupt. And this was basically, but it was idea about bigger, faster, cheaper. These things are the sort of a holy trinity mode in our region, and we are very scared of getting involved with that. But this is a 49 types for this 177 units, and we are very excited because the client accepted it, this crazy idea of making it super diverse. And then of course we are completely bankrupt, but thank God they sold it very well, and they end up helping us because we told them we need a bullet to finish it. So, these things doesn't happen. But so basically, exhibition was about the layout, these kind of what kind of a work was it realized, and then we looked at also different time. This is our chronological sequence of the 69 projects and these kind of. And there's so much stories in there, but like this last Jackass architecture only happened 3 times, and one of them is actually Shanghai Expo Korean Pavilion, which is Holy Trinity, faster, bigger, cheaper, and really killed our project almost. So also it shows how this didn't happen after this critical engagement of this messy situation. I think at only certain time you can do that. Certain projects are like over ambitious. You have like as many as 8 pictograms together. Of course it's red, so it didn't happen. Just go easy with that. And then when you get out of the white room back to the hallway, you get into a black room, which is after, or you can come directly from this curtain to a white room. It's quite, and then this one is actually really about our building, but none of this after room is done by us. Basically, photographers, filmmakers. There's some YouTube users things, but also in a way how architecture is consumed. Before it was more about the produced, then this was consumed and used. I mean, there's some nice moments like this artist, we did a building. We show also sort of post-occupancy pictures of how it's beautifully used, but also she made this drawing before, so we kind of honor them, or we show all those the flattening the knowledge. We have so many like these books, magazines, but then we kind of categorize it, and we're shocked by what kind of project that we didn't care as much as the other, or was get the mileage of medias than the other. So there's the whole world kind of takes architecture in a very different way than we thought. So this was also, and there are also some moments of the constellation that is showing here, and these are also very sonic environment. There are about 50 videos flickering through, each has a sound, so it's kind of like, it's actually quite like hellish in a kind of cacophonic, exciting way, as opposed to this pure lab-like white room. So it's actually, just as an analogy, in a way, some architect stays in this white, clean room, and then the other architect maybe go too much close to this black room. But we are kind of trying to maintain some kind of circular, evolving sort of situation, one project by project, in a way. And then, in order to not to these two become complete parallel universe, of course, we try to not to underestimate what architecture can contribute, but also we don't really fully overestimate that, and I think that's very important to keep a balance, but try to, think ahead a little bit. And that's Rodin room, it's entry, and it was an interesting suggestion from curator that they want to build a ring dome there. So first I refused it because it was very awkward, because it was all first done in the storefront on the street outside, really engaging public, but I just didn't feel very comfortable with this super luxurious setting with this thing next to a Rodin sculpture. Now it's completely blocked. But I managed to convince them actually that this ticket booth outside, they have to pay to see this Rodin show. But I said, we designed this nice desk inside so that this will become for 3 months public. And they accepted it, so that was the only condition. So we're actually, every weekend we had these events 13 times. There were not only architects, but there, some literature people. There actually, it's a acoustic nightmare, all glass and stone, the KPF design, but they really used that, and it was like a World War III happened after 2 hours. And Eun Mi-an, she's a fantastic choreographer, a good friend of mine. She ended up finishing this show as probably the most festive and absurd sort of a exhibition. So, we did, and then I'm going through the third part, which I'm showing you again all the photos that we used for the first encounter for all, some of the buildings that we built before our contribution happened. This is like the very exciting moments. And again, in sort of chronology. So, since borrowing a private space into public for our Ring Dome before after show, actually we've been working on project for the last 5 years with more explicit public ambitions. In fact, it has been a quite drastic shift. 10 out of 12 projects they are currently working on are now public projects through competitions. It wasn't that we are not interested in public buildings before. From the very first year of our practice, we have been consistently participating, 2 or 3 competitions a year, only to be disappointed consistently first 14 years or 13 years. And then, I honestly been a quite envious fan of my European peers who were able to build their careers from public commissions at the very early on. And because I had experience here also. And such as social housing, public space, kind of low-key but not necessarily flashy buildings, but I think these are kind of a rewarding and more dignifying in a way position. And as opposed to free market-driven things, they were fully involved, but that can actually do fine without us. We more and more realize they can just proliferate like there's a giant machine at work, and somehow some of the ideas we kind of developed it quickly taken there, and it becomes something else, and I've been disappointed many times. So, and these public commission that we're doing is quite rewarding because they're about really nurturing either social or cultural or natural urban ecologies that are endangered in a way. So I think these are the very important public role. So from here, next 5 slides, starting from here, it shows the site of recent public projects with new challenges, because it's quite, I mean, there are of course some continuity, but it's a quite challenging site, mainly because site's ground conditions are for refreshingly utopian ambitions are very unusual. New grounds here are like a new normal grounds in a way, because there's not much ground left in the city, and it has become very expensive in the city too. And often the ground itself is more strange and interesting than the architecture that will land, or therefore it does not need architecture at all sometimes. And sometimes there is hardly any ground. Yeah, they don't come with a pictogram yet, but for now we're gonna just call it a new ground. So this is actually I don't mean to be this upside down situation. This is a mistake, but I call it a brutalist Arcadia because it was this ring road that was built 20 years ago, and it's about 15 meters above ground, and then there's a stream running that connects to the Han River, and now it's these huge fishes and very exotic cranes and so on. But that is the site that the most recent competition win, which is a social housing next to this situation. So basically, it's hardly a site. I took this picture actually of this area of this 20 years ago, and I was really inspired at the time. This was 1999 with the students at the time. So idea was that this is 147-meter long site that is meant to be the infrastructure site. So there already infrastructure, which is a rainwater pump station, is designed. The task was to build the social housing on top of it, because city don't have much site left, because all the sites are very expensive now. So basically it was open 2-stage competition, and this happened to face the south, is where it's not facing the noisy ring road. So it's a simple 200 unit. And then the site that is facing this ring road has a great view of this Arcadia, the brutalist Arcadia, but it's noisy. So the idea is that actually this given rainwater pump station, very deep, and then just this facility, and then this housing on the south, and then other things are like in an atrium situation facing north with a view. So that's that, and that's basically the part that is facing with the sort of hikeable shared programs and so on. Ground level with the pump, you can see, is part of the scenery, and then because it's also site is there's no really leftover site there, and swimming pools and so on. And then the next one is actually another similar intention, because I think, but it's about the nurturing the cultural ecology. It's a cinematheque that we won, and actually now within the budget we just finished, just about to bid for this, and this was a advocate maybe 8 years ago because Korea, you probably heard of. Have you seen the Parasite, by the way? Bong Joon-ho, the director, is one of the advocates for that. So it was very cool indie scene happened late 90s, and then there's some, of course, huge superstars, but strangely, I think it makes, everywhere that now it's harder and harder for independent filmmakers to make films. They all go to Marvel Comics, and usually they just produce the big ones now. So idea is that they could have built this thing sort of further away, cheaper land, but I think this was where the city architect role came in, that Chungmuro, where Korea's filmmaking began, late 50s, they thought it was very symbolic and important to keep this social, cultural ecology going. So they picked a site that is very small, but you can build 50 meters high. The brief itself was a very unusual and exciting. So basically, there are 5 parts that are solid. And our idea was that, the film going was, cinema going was a very social and also not like Netflix binge watching at home situation, but a very urban experience. So it's like 4 stacked up marquees in between. Underneath space would be the social programs like cafe, tickets, library, lecture halls, and the office, and so on. And in a way also, it kind of connects with these 2 sort of scale differences, because we used to think that Seoul will become like a Singapore or all this modern high-rise buildings, but after a couple of economic crisis, I think this situation also will remain, and I think we kind of accepted it as a unique situation. So that's that. And then this is MBRDB, you heard of it, Seoul, which was actually very noble intention to pedestrianize. It's not like London. I mean, I walked really today, whole day, just enjoying the river and all that, but Seoul has to improve a lot. But we are also invited to participate 6 years ago, and we came in 3rd. We did completely opposite. MBRDB had a smart idea with this alphabetical order tree, almost like a encyclopedic landscape. And then we did something like completely specific every corner, something that we can do, who were able to visit the site very often during the competition. We didn't win. But then the connecting part, what we proposed was part of the Namsan entry that we thought it should be extended. But then we didn't win. And then they invited us back as a sort of a consolation prize earlier this year after 5 years. And then we got this project recently, so we're just starting now. So basically the idea is that this is a kind of site that is super fragmented, but it already has important elements like a mountain and this fragmented fortress wall that started from 600 years ago. So basically the idea is that basically this mountain, Namsan Mountain, just spills over. There's hardly any architectural element actually that we propose, and that would actually nicely complement. This is where the MBRDB walk ends. So it has this like cool concrete sort of a situation with encyclopedia, and then you literally connect to presence of the mountain. It will sort of begin at this lower valley. So this is how it is, and then now we made a car level below, so then it just becomes this history and basically the nature. And this also we're gonna retrieve that and then turn into, we're working with the archaeology also team. So this is how these 2 will kind of balance out, hopefully. So sometimes I think we're, Seoul, I think has enough important things that could be highlighted in a way. And I think these are also, I'm almost close to the end of it. Thank you for putting up with this, by the way. Basically, it's a flat land that is near domestic airport, a whole new part of this very dense office park-like development. Actually, LG, you're probably known for flat screen TVs. They developed the larger area here, and our task was to design a park at the same time art gallery. So basically the idea was that actually we create this sort of artificial mound, and then the building becomes the 4th one, quite generously opening up toward the mountain and the little mounds, which creates a little valley. And then this arch is about 27 meters span, so it has huge anchor, and this arch itself also becomes this kind of a cloud bridge to lead people up, so that building becomes 4th mound. And the height of this structure is, lowest point is 3.3 meters up to 11 meters tall. So that required varying height space. We just proposed as a one large space, 700 square meter columnar space that varies drastically. And this is actually, we are pouring right now, but we're doing it as a one pour. We never done like 11 meter tall with one pour, so that you don't have a cold bridge. But this is last week, and wish us luck. Okay, and then the last one actually is about this Riverside, and that is Han River is actually unlike, I mean, there's many cities, I mean, it's quite unusual because it's 3 times of the Thames, 1 kilometer long, and there are about 30 bridges that were built last 50 years. And this was how the river was understood, and this was when the city was understood as organic, something, organism. And I think this was when we were 200,000 people. And these are some of the big realistic depictions of the river. It looks almost, yeah, it's like paradise. And I'm old enough to remember I was able to swim in there. There's a beach. And then, of course, it came with a flood, also every summer. And then it got controlled. And now these riverbanks, unlike, I mean, I walked along Thames River, but this had much flatter and much wider territories. Actually, the flood zone fluctuating about 9 meters. I think you have about 3 meters or so. And but so you really can't do much there on the riverside. Unlike the Thames, you have cafes and things. And this is, I took this video last summer, because one hand is quite almost, again, sort of sad because it's really not that interesting, but people are very enthusiastic about this water spewing with few food trucks. But it's because, you know, I mean, we have some flashy buildings now too, but it's because this area is really challenged to do anything. So one of the thing was this island. I think you have this AA file. I contributed the story about this history of this island, so you can get into it more. But this island was lived by more than 400 people until late 60s, and there were ship makers. But then this whole modernity came in. This island was somewhere next to this large sand delta, and they have to create this river walls to control. So they have to be exploded into rubbles to create these rubbles to make the dam. So that's what happened. So they disappeared, but it grew back. And it grew back, and then it just grew back a lot bigger than what it used to be, 6 times. So now it's become this like really important bird migration site. It's called Ramsar site, and it's a very surreal sort of situation. So the premise of that is basically bird watching, floating structure, pontoon structure. So this is, we've been working on that last 3 years, and it's a very long process, but still going. And then what happened was a year ago, just next to this pontoon structure that we were working on, there's what we call maybe the budget Tate modern situation, that is a power station that is no longer used. This was the first power station in the 1930s, 50s, 70s, and then this is how the flood is controlled, yet now the disconnection with the water happened. So it's actually a quite challenging situation now that all the riverside is occupied by private views and private car experiences, basically, and this kind of a fluctuating riverbank situation. So basically the idea here is that this is a ground level with this island blocked by this 4-meter high structure, flyover, and then which is hopeless, and then on the roof of turbine hall has this amazing heaven and hell difference view. So basically we're trying to make this roof of the turbine hall into a most urban sort of space, so that bringing all the trucks with the large elevators, and it's a place where you can go up without paying for entry, but it's really function as an urban space. And there are 2 power stations. One is going to be safe as an industrial, let's say, what do you call it, sort of heritage, and this is that. And then the other one will be gutted out, and then it will be inserted with the new facilities. I mean, appropriating as much as we can, but performance black box, and then basement exhibition, and also sort of a residency program. And the top part of the boiler will become without the boiler. We're just keeping them as it is, all the catwalks, and that becomes like a observation sort of a platform. we only add the roof so that people can, hang out more. And the idea is that also this new ground came in that these two turbine hall can be connected with this vertical lift door. And then that could also extend further the basement parking, but the whole thing becomes like a 250-meter long linear urban space. So we made some comparison with this for the competition that turbine hall almost have a similar length to the Arsenale of Venice Biennale, Pompidou. I mean, it's going to be like a super budget project, but it could also have an ambition, and we have now enough precious cultural spaces in Seoul, so this could be also have a unique kind of a role. So we're showing these kind of possibilities. So basically, the new ground that we create horizontal, and then this vertical difference is about 50 meters. So in a way, with the flyover in between from the fluctuating water level to this surface of the machine. So that has been quite a challenging sort of endeavor. And this recently, I mean, just to plug in, but I'm done with it. So recently, there's a Seoul Biennale of Architecture and Urbanism. I think that's also quite important now for the city, and we were part of it. So I am making this anticlimactic ending because I don't really like the ending in beginning, but I'll just play this, and then everybody else, maybe who has interest, you can ask me questions or comments. So you don't have to clap. I don't like this. Continue. I think I went on quite long. Huh? Yeah. Thank you very much. You can do that too. Very, very kind. Thank you. Yeah.